Hello, Tristan from PSI here, talking a little bit more about spark plugs. So the ones that I recommend are these laser iridiums by NGK. The nice thing about that, these ones in particular, it actually explains it on the back of the box. But you have the iridium tip, which is the pointy bit, and then the arm that comes over, that is actually platinum, or coated in platinum. It's not solid platinum. But that means that the wear properties of this spark plug are amazing. They'll last a good long time. Both of those metals have a high conductivity. So this is the one that I primarily recommend. I think in the YouTube short, I mentioned how we go to a colder heat range. It doesn't mean that that multi-thousand volt spark is any colder. What it means is that the spark plug in its entirety is dissipating the heat better into the aluminum heads. Particularly in the EJ255 heads, these are the single AVCS style heads. They have hot spots internally, so anything we can do to cool the exhaust, just the chamber where the combustion is occurring, is going to help tremendously to just help this engine not detonate. So one of the ways we can help is run a slightly cooler spark plug. So that's the best of the best. If you went with something a little bit different, let me put these down. If you went with just iridium plugs, these are like the last ones, but they're missing that platinum tip. So what happens is after, I don't really know the mileage to be fair, but towards the time that these are doing just fine, how else can I say that? There's got to be a better way. Mileage wise, I don't know, maybe. It's not really mileage because it's load based. Under high load, basically, I guess I could say it that way, the laser iridiums do fantastically well. They just do not really wear down. What you'll notice on the regular iridiums is under high load. This little arm, the part that's coated in platinum in the nice ones, it's just a standard steel in this version. And you'll see pitting where the arc is connecting from the tip to the anode to the diode. It'll start to wear away at that location, and then what happens is your spark gap is growing bigger and bigger. That spark gap growing is bad for so many reasons. If it gets too big, literally the incoming charge of air and fuel can blow the spark out before it ignites, and you get what feels like an ignition cut in your engine. That's not a good thing. Or the other thing that can happen is you can start excessively loading the coils. So we have these individual coil on plugs for the Subarus, and they are very happy when that gap is right at the correct distance. But if that gap starts to creep into a larger distance because of wearing away of parts, it can still make the spark jump, but it requires more and more amperage from this thing, and that additional amperage at such a high voltage means that these guys are starting to get hot and they're going to wear out a lot faster. Now the cheapest of the cheap, but maybe the best of the best, are good old copper plugs. Copper is one of the best conductors that are out there. We make fantastic power on copper plugs, but they wear out very, very quickly. So where we might do copper plugs on something like a DSM, a 4G63, a 4B11, a B18, a B16, because it's so easy to just change these guys out and they're cheap. For Subaru, we do not recommend copper plugs. Actually, I think these are for the, what is it? It's a Toyota engine. I forget which one it is, but it's these are good, but not for Subarus. Then that leads me to these two products. So we have an anti-seize, and we have a connector protector, an electrical grease. Would you use either of these products when installing a spark plug? Some people would say yes, I would say no. So the idea is that maybe you would put anti-seize on the threads of the spark plug, and then the other idea is maybe you would put this conductor protector on the back where the spark plug connects to the coil, because of course this sits on top like that. So I would say no to both, and here's why. The conductor protector, it actually says so on the back here, but we found it to be true too. This is good for 12, 24, up to 110 volts. Anything above that, and this acts as a conductor between not only the two metal pieces, but whatever this goo oozes out too. So what can happen is this can ooze out and touch the walls of the cylinder head, and all of a sudden you've got a ground fault and your spark plug won't work correctly. So don't use this. Also, this runs off, I forget the exact voltage, but thousands of volts. This is only good to 110 volts, so not compatible. Then the anti-seize lubricant. What happens is NGK ship their spark plugs with a lubricant on the threads. So by adding an additional lubricant, we're doing something that's unnecessary. But what I've found with these kind of lubricants, these high heat lubricants, is they're not good for dissimilar metals. So you've got a nice stainless steel copper spark plug here, and you're putting it into an aluminum head, and it causes galling. Not necessarily when it's going in, but once this is cured and you're now trying to take it out, you have that cold welding that occurs at a molecular level between the stainless steel here, or the zinc plating if it's one of those, and the aluminum heads. And that is terrible. That's how you destroy the threads, and that's a huge headache. The whole head has to come out. You've got chunks of metal now in your block. It's a terrible thing. If you just leave them as they are, you put in fresh ones, that's the way to go. They won't gall, they'll come out, and you'll be just fine. And the other thing that we can talk about with spark plugs is some people will recommend running a ground wire to this pin of the spark plug. And while that's nice, technically the spark is traveling right from the coil through the plug into the combustion chamber, but it's jumping from the anode to the diode, and this diode is now grounded into the surrounding metal. So you could technically run a ground to this individual coil and that individual coil, but it works out better, and you end up with better surface area, better contact between conductors, using other locations on the block. But certainly some manufacturers do sell coils with individual grounds. There's nothing wrong with that, but the Subaru grounding issue is solved by using different kinds of grounds, more grounds, not just handling these grounds. This isn't the only thing that needs a good ground signal. In fact, all the sensors require a good ground signal, and surprisingly, Subaru has the ECU grounded to the intake, specifically on the, what would that be? That'd be the driver's, on the driver's side, the protector for the injectors is where they ground their ECU. So that is an area that needs a new ground. And of course, we talked about those oxygen-free grounding wires. That would be down here. Let me see if I can show you that. Yeah. So this little plug right here, let me move the camera. So this is that grounding wire, and we're tying it into right here on the bottom of this head for this side of the engine. But we're going to add more grounds than just the two that I mentioned so far. There's another ground to the bracket that holds the alternator. We're going to do the ground that goes to that ECU. We're going to make sure that that sees a strong ground signal. And then there's a fourth ground that'll come from the back of the block to the... Actually, I can show it to you. Sorry about jerky camera. But over here, this will be the fourth ground. This is actually not the right place for it, but this is where it's connecting. So it's a nice huge piece of metal back here to ground to. That's not a good spot, but technically this is coming across and grounding to the back center of the block. But we'll redo that and show you how we do it differently there. But yeah, this is the engine bay. It needs a good clean before the engine goes back in, but this is where the business happens.